Hello and welcome to the 2020 Brain and Transcranial Photobiomodulation Virtual Summit. I'm Dr. Joe Theodore, your host, and my guest is Dr. Theodore Henderson, MD, PhD. He's a psychiatrist and psychopharmacology expert with extensive training and experience in radiology, nuclear medicine, psychopharmacology, brain science, laser technology, and psychiatric genetics. He's the co-founder of Neuroluminance Brain Health Centers, Inc., and director of Synaptic Space, and the medical director of the Theodore Henderson, Inc., a psychiatric practice in Denver. He's taught numerous courses in neuroimaging, continuing medical education courses, and lectures nationally and internationally. He's numerous published works discussing neuroimaging, and as well as unique treatment approaches to depression, chronic fatigue, ADHD, and anxiety. He's guest editor for a number of journals, including JAMA, Journal of Neuropsychiatry, and the Journal of Nuclear Medicine. He's the first to publish research utilizing multi-watt infrared laser to treat TBI and depression. It's my pleasure to have you aboard, Doc.
Thank you.
So the question I put towards people at the beginning is, you know, you got your MD degree in 1985 in psychiatry and then finished with a neurobiology, PhD in neurobiology. And how do you go from being a classically trained allopath, psychiatrist, to shining light on the brain? And how
okay. Yeah. Well, it actually goes back to really college, you know, and I hate to bring up an old dog, but Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolution.
The Structure of Scientific Revolution, okay.
So when we talk about paradigm shifts, that's a Thomas Kuhn term. And I read this book in college and it revolutionized my thinking. And so from that moment on, my thinking was always question the paradigm, question the dogma of what's being presented to me. You know, so in my training, the dogma was, you know, that electrical activity determined how the brain organized itself. And I did experiments to show that that was wrong, and that in fact growth factors were responsible for organizing the brain. So I worked with growth factors throughout graduate school and into my postdoctoral training. And I went into psychiatry because I found radiology boring, frankly. And psychiatry is actually quite fascinating. And the neuroimaging and the radiology came back into it because I started doing functional brain scans, SPECT scans, and PET scans, and was medical director of 2 facilities and still run a very large group of people who are interested in furthering the use of SPECT scans, international group. And out of that work, I kept running into patients who had odd things like chronic fatigue or traumatic brain injury or treatment-resistant depression. But when you looked at the brain, it didn't look like what you would expect to see. So, and the other thing that's worse is, worst case scenario is you get a patient, they have a traumatic brain injury, you say to them, you have a traumatic brain injury. Congratulations, have a nice life. We can't do anything for you. So when the opportunity came and was presented, because Dr. Larry Maurice, my colleague, came to me and said, I want to do imaging of people before and after I treat them with multi-watt laser. And my initial response is, you're a nut job. Infrared light doesn't do anything to the brain, literally. I mean, literally, this is my perspective, guys. But being a curious fellow, I started reading the literature. I started reading all the literature of Hamblin's group and the group, University of Texas Southeastern Uniformed Services Group, all of these people doing work. And I started to see the science. And I started to see that what we're actually doing is turning on growth factors. And it's all of a sudden, this is old home week. I know this material well. I know what growth factors can do. I know how they work. I know what they talk to. I know how the timing of things happen. So this led me further into the work and led us to the problem that I'll be talking about today, which is the problem of scale. How do we grow something that works in a mouse up to working in a human?
Very good. So I guess without much further ado, let's pop off those slides.
All right.
Transcranial infrared photobiomodulation. You are not doing what you think you're doing. Go ahead, Ted.
All right. Let's see if we can get this to work. There we go. All right, just disclosures. I'm not really working for anybody. We have our foundation, which provides infrared light therapy and other treatments for veterans and first responders who cannot afford it. I'll leave it at that. So here's the deal with this problem of growing something that works in a mouse to something that works in a human. There are multiple barriers to light penetration: hair, scalp, skull, brain. And each one of them takes away a percentage of the penetration. The energy density that we need to deliver to the tissue, that is deliver to the cell, is 0.9 to 36 joules per centimeter squared. That's what's necessary to turn on the mitochondrial and post-mitochondrial events that are responsible for the neuroplasticity. So we have to ask the question, if, as I hypothesize, a half-watt LED diode cannot get light through the human skull, there must be an alternate mechanism.
But go wait a second.
A lot of this is...
Wait a second. Go back.
Yep.
Go back. I'm the guy that raises his hand in class, so that's
Okay.
why I'm the moderator. So you wait a second here. Energy densities of 0.9 to 36 joules per centimeter are required.
Mhm.
That's a 40-fold change.
Yeah.
Okay, so there may be that number, I mean, that's a big number. So we don't know the exact number, but this is the range. So what is actually required in a 40 times difference? So that's the question. So we've been saying that we kind of get some numbers thrown around with the other presenters of how much it is. And let's just say, for round figures, let's say 10 joules per centimeter.
Okay. I'm fine with 10 joules.
Let's go with 10 joules. But you're going to say that there's an alternative mechanism at work. So give us a whirl. Keep going.
All right. Well, let me keep going. So a lot of this is covered in chapter 6 of the book that was recently published by Michael Hammond, Ying Wang. The other key chapter is chapter 11, which speaks about the idea of remote photobiomodulation, an important concept here. Now, this is what I'm going to present here. It's not intended as an attack on anybody's data. It's a question of physics and a question of logic. And I'm going to give a lot of examples of how the literature shows us the physics just doesn't work, and then ask the logical flaw in our thinking. I want to as Thomas Kuhn taught us, when the paradigm is shaky, it's time to ask questions. And hopefully we don't have to burn anyone at the stake in order to get the paradigm to change, but we have to ask questions in order for the science to grow. The worst thing that can happen is for the current environment, which says, oh, just put an LED on somebody's head and you can make them smarter, you can get rid of their TBI, you can do, et cetera, because that is conducive to charlatans moving in and selling stuff on the internet, and that will further and forever discredit this field. And I know this from experience. I've walked that path. And we are fighting. The path is, and I'll be specific, is the path of SPECT scans. So, and all forgiveness, Daniel Lehman is not a charlatan. Lots of people think he is. He just forgot to do the science. And now we're having to backpedal and do the science to prove that many of the things he claimed were correct. And I've been a participant in that science. And the battle to get that published is astronomical. So here was our first paper. Dr. Larry Maurice, my colleague, along with Paula Cassano, we published a case series of patients treated with multi-watt laser, that is 10 to 13 watts in typical sort of wavelengths, delivered to the patient's brain. using treatment intervals of 20 or treatment course of about 20 minutes. Most of them got 10 treatments. And here's the change that we saw. Headaches, dropping significantly. Sleep issues, they all had sleep issues. Virtually all of that went away. Irritability decreased dramatically. Cognitive impairment decreased for those who had it. Depression decreased for all who had it. Anxiety, everybody in the group had anxiety. It dropped to 20%. And we followed these patients. I mean, the data collection was completed in 2013. It's now 2020. We talked to the last set of patients about 2 months ago. They continued to do well. So this was a persistent change. Key point, persistent change. Now, just so that we all know, photobiomodulation there's an extensive body of literature, which a lot of us have read every single bit of it. And this, there are pages and pages and pages, and this is not the comprehensive list. So I won't bore anybody with how infrared light works. We all have an understanding of that. We all have an appreciation. If we deliver a certain amount of energy, and the range is 0.9 to 36 joules per centimeter squared, let's just say 10 joules per centimeter squared, to the mitochondria, we activate a number of things. We turn on ATP by increasing mitochondrial electron transport chain. We also increase oxygenation, nitric oxide, which is very, very brief-lived. You can't put a whole lot of stock on nitric oxide because it's gone in milliseconds. But turning on cell signaling and turning on nuclear factor kappa B, which then activates genes, which initiates a whole series of things, including growth factors, such as BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Those are really probably the engines of what are making things happen in terms of traumatic brain injury, and based on our research in terms of depression. So BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is the leading neurotrophic factor in neuroplasticity in the adult brain. So that's responsible for neuron repair, new synapse formation, stem cell activation. Also, infrared light turns on powerful inflammation mediators. This is one of the reasons it's so good for low back pain. There's a study that Dr. Maurice did, low back pain versus surgery. And guess what? Treating with multi-watt laser in low back pain beats surgery in terms of clinical outcome. But there's a problem of scale. The mouse skull is about the thickness of 3 sheets of paper. I used to do mouse studies and baby rat studies and hamster studies. I worked with these brains a lot. And the human skull, particularly mine, is considerably thicker. The mouse skull is very, very small, 510 millimeters, cubic millimeters, and ours is 3,000 times bigger. So yes, you might be able to use an LED through a very thin skull to reach a very small mouse brain, but can you treat a brain injury inside of a human skull, or a stroke inside of a human skull, inside of a human brain, with low power infrared light? And the stroke studies by Lapchak and colleagues back, a decade and a half ago showed that that was not the case. So we asked the question. Went into the lab and asked the question, can infrared light reach the depths of the human brain in order to be able to treat a traumatic brain injury? Is this even logical? And so we literally got human skin, cadaver human skin, and interposed it between a light meter and a light emitter. And the light emitter could be, an LED, and we saw that 0% of the energy got through the skin, which was 1.9 millimeters. And we showed that, yes, in fact, a small percentage, not 90%, but a very small percentage, in fact, around 5% to 2% of the infrared light from the laser got through.
So just go back because I want to focus on that. There's some interesting data there. So common custom LEDs of low wattage, which is what they used, at this is the temperature change that was seen in the penetration in the last column there. If you want to highlight that with your mouse, that was 8% with your laser, 8.1% with the light cure laser, 12% with the dial wave laser, who had a 15 watt. 15
Okay, so it depends on where you're looking. So if you look at just watts going through 2 millimeters, this is air. And you can see there's already a loss of energy through air. Here you got 10 watts on the face, right up against the light meter. It's 9 to 9.14, 2 millimeters. So just the air loses energy. Air is absorbing energy and scattering energy. But with 9 watts at the face, you end up with about 1 watt penetrating the skin.
Okay.
Okay. While the LED 0.2 or watts 0 gets through.
So you had a space between the bone and the receiver was flush on the bone.
Flush on the emitter was flush on the light meter. So there's 0 gap. And so that's on phos, measuring directly on the meter. And then watts at 2 millimeter is measuring with a 2 millimeter airspace. So that we're taking into account that air will cause scatter and absorption. Then we insert the skin into that 2 millimeter gap.
Just skin now.
Just human skin, 1.9 millimeters thick. And you can see that the LEDs were not able to penetrate. The light cure, 90% of the energy was lost in penetrating 2 millimeters of skin. At 15 watts, you're getting, about 80% of the energy was absorbed.
Excellent.
And that's shown graphically here.
Okay. Well, can I go back just 1 second for that for 1 second?
Sure.
Because some of this stuff is a little bit critical. So did you use, the one thing that I'm kind of looking at here is the, centimeter square, how much was, here I see a nice big bright sign with that looks like a laser off of the surface of the skin.
Right here?
Yeah, so you're looking at the centimeter squared, how much it was at the place versus at the point of the laser. Because like for a couple of things here, just practically for me, one, LEDs are not usually put out in the air. There's not a distance between the LED and the body. They're usually in contact. And we know that you're going to lose a ton of penetration when you go that way. The second thing is, did you use like 5 LEDs, or did you have the same surface area, or did you just use like one LED?
Okay, so yeah, these are both commercial products. So there are multiple LEDs in an array. Okay. This illustration here is pulled back just so that you can see the infrared light. It's for illustration purposes. But this is the 10 watt laser. It would be right up against the skin.
Oh.
We just wanted to measure going through skin.
All of the devices were placed directly on the skin.
Correct.
But you just gave an example of what would happen if it went through the air, and then what would happen if it went through 2 millimeters of skin.
Right. And the reason is because, it's 2 millimeters. Whether there's air there or skin there, you need to kind of account for what part can you attribute to air and what part can you contribute or attribute to skin.
Gotcha.
Moving on. So here we show that sort of difference between an LED system, picture system, and what the 10 watts they delivered, 10% of the light getting through the skin. And with 15 watts, 16% is getting through the skin. So quite a big difference. We then took it and compared this to data that's already out there. So Kalari looked at this years ago and looked at the progressive movement of 820 nanometer diode and progressive thickening of the skin. And what you see, if you follow the line of regression, basically here we are 2 millimeters, and at 2.1, it basically drops to 0 penetration. So Kalari found the same thing that we did. We then wanted to look at the question of getting through 3 centimeters of brain and skull. Now, we didn't use human brain in this case. We can now. It'd be possible to obtain the cadaver. But in this case, what we used is fresh sheep. So we cut the fresh sheep so that we had a parietal bone and 3 centimeters of brain. And then we interposed that against the filter and put the laser or the LED on the other side. And, you know, they were pushed right up tight against each other, as we just described. But we also measured just what happens when you try to shoot infrared light through 3 centimeters of air and how much loss there is just from air. So here's that custom LED again. When it's on phos, we got that 0.05, but at 30 millimeters, 3 centimeters, nothing got through, and not surprisingly, nothing got through skull and brain either. Using another LED, 2 milliwatt, or excuse me, 0.2 watts, on phos, very good. Through 3 centimeters of air, we lost it all. Through 3 centimeters of skull and tissue, we lost it all. Here we used a K laser, which is a 6 watt, and there's some loss on phos, and a tiny bit gets through the air, and a tiny bit arguably was detectable getting through the brain at 30 millimeters. And this sort of matches, you know, the early work that Lapchak did looking at strokes with a 6 watt laser. Our light cure 10, we're losing something on phos, and we could talk about that. But still have plenty of energy after 30 millimeters of air. And here we're getting 0.35% penetrating to the depth of 3 centimeters of skull and bone. The Diawave 15 watt gave us a little bit better, 2.9%. Now here's what's interesting. If you look at the light cure, 0.35% penetrating 3 centimeters of skull and bone. If you pulse it at 10 hertz, 1.46 gets through. So pulsing actually improves penetration. And this is very consistent with the literature.
Very good.
So this is what it looks like when you put that all together. And the blue bar is skin. The red bar is 3 centimeters of skin and skull with just continuous wave. And the green bar is pulsing. So you can see the LEDs, we're not getting even through skin, let alone 3 centimeters of skull and brain. With the 10 watt laser, we can get through the skin. We can get a tiny bit to 3 centimeters of skull and brain. And with pulsing, you improve that. And the same thing here with the 15 watt. 15 watts got better penetration through skin, and you get better penetration to the depths of 3 centimeters. Now, there's a lot of things that interfere with the penetration of infrared light. We can't just imagine that, you know, it's all getting through, because skin, you know, and this is just a representation of skin, has a lot of things that will reflect and refract and diffuse and bend the light, as well as simply absorb it. And so there's a lot of factors that go into how light gets through tissue. Mm-hmm. Now Lapchak, who his article about where things went wrong is a very, very key article. It really helped shape my thinking. He did a study here where he took a 700 milliwatt light source using mouse, rat, rabbit, and human brain, wet and dry. Black is shown for wet and dry is shown in gray. And you'd see, of course, the mouse brain, very thin. NILT penetration in terms of milliwatts per centimeter squared was fairly good. 700 milliwatts, and they're up in the 400, 450 range. Using just the dry measure. Rat, thicker, you've lost about 50%. You're more than 50%, 60%. You're at the 250 to 300 range. Rabbit, even thicker. We're now down in the 100 to 150 range. And here's human, barely anything getting through whatsoever. So again, this idea of scale. Lichigov did a study in 2006 looking at scalp and skull. The top is just skull, and the bottom is skull plus scalp using a 1 watt near-infrared energy source at 810. And you can see the line of regression. We follow the line of regression. Where does it hit zero? It hits zero around 2 millimeters. And same thing if we put scalp in there. We start out much lower at 0.8. You're at the range of 7% getting through, and at 0.8 with scalp and skull, you're at half of that, 4%. And still, the line of regression, you follow it down, you don't get more than 2 millimeters. And yet there are these products out there, saying, here, look, we've got these LEDs. In fact, it's not half a watt because we got a whole bunch of LEDs. Count them up. There's 80 LEDs there. That's 80 times half a watt. We're giving you 40 watts. There's a problem with that logic, though, and I'll show you. And we literally did this study. So we took 2 lasers at 2 watts each and 2 emitters, put them, near each other, not quite side by side, and sure enough, the emitter would pick up 2 watts, and this one would pick up 2 watts. You put them right next to each other, but it's a cone, it's a cylinder of light coming from the LED. Well, it's actually a cone, depending on whether you're using a laser LED or an LED. But still, put them right next to you. You got 2 watts here and you got 2 watts here. You can't say, well, we got 2 LEDs, we have 4 watts. Even if you angle them so that they're projecting onto the same receiver, the same light meter, 2 watts, you think you have 4? No, you got 3.6. Now, it's even worse with LEDs because LEDs are not, they're not a solid cone of light. The cone has an area that is at half a watt, and then it's got this area out here where there is there's a degradation of both the wavelength and the power. So yeah, you put 2 next to each other, you'll have half a watt. But if you have this overlap right here in the area where there's a decrement in both the wavelength and the power, you're not going to hit, half a watt. You're not going to hit 1 watt because you got half a watt plus half a watt. You got 0.2 watts.
You did this experiment. You did this experiment.
We did this study, yes. And we can show it visually here. So this is ballistic gel. This is what they use. You get a big block of this ballistic gel, you shoot a bullet through it, and you can see what it does to the human body. And here is a low power laser, literally a 1 watt laser. And you can see it shining through the ballistic gel and coming out the other side. Okay,
got it.
And that is I'd have to look it up. I think it's 12 centimeters. And here is an LED, and you see how the LED spreads out, and you can literally see the decrement out here on the edges in sort of the power. You can see where, yeah, there's still some color, but it's not where that edge is. And you can see that it basically is dropping off, and by about 50%, you've lost all the power. Now, we took the ballistic gel, and we heated it up, and it turns into a liquid. Oh. And then we suspended salt and, and a little bit of polymer and air in it by whipping it up so that we had a multi-textured material that mimics, what you would expect with human skin or even the brain, where there are multiple surfaces and multiple points of reflection and refraction. And here's the laser, and you can see it coming through, and it gets about 3/4 of the way through, and here's the LED. It stops about right here. Okay, so really an illustration of not only that idea of how much reflection and refraction plays a part in how infrared light gets through tissue, but also the difference between an LED and a laser. The next thing I'd say is about pulsing. Pulsing the light increases the depth of penetration of the tissue into the tissue. It also protects the tissue from heating. Human tissue, with all of the circulation, it quickly diffuses the heat. As quickly, the blood will carry away the heat, allowing you to avoid overheating critical tissues such as the brain. It's a bad outcome when you cook your patient's brain. Now, the other thing that penetration does that's really important is penetration of coherent light creates this sort of little points of conflict between the light waves. And so at one point, the light wave will actually, the two light waves will eliminate each other. And at other points, the light wave will advance each other or exaggerate each other. And this is called speckling. And here's an illustration of speckling. And you can see these little dots of intense color. That's where there is more power, simply because of the interaction of the light waves. And there's areas of black, which are areas of decreased power because of the interaction of the light waves. All right, skin or scalp and skull and the brain itself. The brain itself is a potent inhibitor of the passage of infrared light. I talk about this in the book chapter, but they actually did a study with pig brain and found that, pretty much 3 centimeters of pig brain will absorb the infrared light that you shine into it. But there's another barrier. So we got these guys, selling their LED devices here or doing research on them, and they put them on the top of the patient's head. And what do we see here? There's hair, right? I'm pretty sure there's hair on the top of this guy's head. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm definitely sure there's hair on the top of this young lady's head. And here's the infrared device sitting on top of the hair. Now, do we just assume the hair is not in any way affecting the infrared light, that magically the infrared light just passes through the hair? No, we need to ask the question. So we actually did the study. And here's the study. This is literally the light meter screen. I just took a screenshot of it. What we did is we positioned the laser, set at 10 watts, and we set it 5 millimeters off of the light meter. So 10 watts shining 5 millimeters onto a light meter, there's already a decrement. 10 watts drops to 9.79 watts. Then we inserted hair, in just our poor technologist's hair in between, in that 5 millimeter gap. And this is what the light meter showed when the hair was interposed there. So more than 9.5 watts of energy was being absorbed by the hair, which, by the way, began to smoke, and she has yet to forgive me.
Oh.
So what it translates to is, we're talking about basically 98% of the energy was absorbed by the hair. So, I put this up here graphically for us to look at. If we say 98% of the energy is absorbed by hair, so we're left down here with 2%, and 90% of the energy is blocked by skin, so we're left down here with some smaller percent, and then the bone is blocking 90%, so down here is what we get going into the brain. Now let's start with a 0.5 watt LED. And 98% of that's absorbed, so now we have 0.01 watts. Now that's got to go through the scalp, so now what's getting to the bone is 0.001 watts. And after it goes to the bone and 90% absorbed, what gets to the surface of the brain, just the surface of the brain, is 0.0004 watts. Okay, so the idea that each of these tissues that overlie the brain are absorbing energy makes us have to question what we're actually delivering to the brain.
Now, wait a second, one more thing.
Colleagues actually address this.
Let me interject one thing.
Yeah.
So go back to the lady's the blonde-haired lady, because you make an important safety tip: don't burn the brain. Another important safety tip: don't burn the hair.
Yes.
But the point I'm saying is that 5 millimeters, which is small distance between the laser and the receiver, is more than everything else that you've measured so far. 2 millimeters of skull or 2 millimeters of skin. So that's a big distance. And we know that your amount of energy that's going to be, the farther away, the amount of energy is going to be reduced. And if you take a laser and lay it on the skin, it has a certain amount of penetration, but if you push that laser in and dent the skin, penetration goes up a lot more. Same with LEDs. So I agree with your experiment. I see what's going on, but I'm trying to just say, if we extrapolate that to application, it's good. It's a mathematical model, I agree with, but we put it with application, we probably wouldn't do it that way. Do you follow my line of thought?
Okay.
I wouldn't put a laser 5 millimeters away for a treatment outcome. But I understand your math. I understand I'm following your perspective. Would you agree?
All right. But the difficulty is, look at this apparatus. I'm fairly certain that is not pressing. This stuff here on top is not being pressed into the scalp. And if it is, it's being pressed into hair. And 5 millimeters of hair is not all that much.
Anything that doesn't, I'm with you, anything that doesn't touch the skin or even press against the skin is going to lose a lot of juice.
I would agree. So Dagdale and colleagues did a study where they looked at penetration through bone. They were really focused on getting through the human skull, and they used cadaverous skull with a half-watt LED. And they felt that they could deliver 3 milliwatts per centimeter squared just through the skull, ignoring the scalp. And their own calculation was the effluence would be 0.0064 joules per centimeter squared. Now, what was the number we agreed to?
About 10
joules.
10 joules.
Right? So this is like 1/140th of the smallest. And with our calculation, it's now 1/600th of the minimum power density thought that was needed to activate cellular mechanisms of plasticity. Okay, that's my problem. The math doesn't work. Now, if the math doesn't work, then how is it possible that people get better?
So first of all, okay, you are having a discussion with the person. I failed accounting. Okay, so I don't trust my math work. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a pass on this because I can't do the math, but I agree with you. If we said that we needed about 10 joules and we're really getting about per, of these LEDs, blah, 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 we're getting a small amount of joules.
You can agree with this, right? You can see the scale.
Something's not going through.
There you go. All right. So how do we deal with the clinical phenomenon that people are getting better, that people are getting benefit from using LED? And what's the difference? So, and again, this is meant as in no way attack. This is meant as, what does this mean scientifically, and what does it mean for us going forward? So Naser and colleagues published 2 case samples, two cases that were treated daily with infrared LED for 7 months. 2 panels on the head and 1 LED panel on the foot. That worked. The patients got better. One patient went back to work. But as soon as they stopped the treatment, the patients began to lose ground. They began to get worse and worse, based on the paper. So Naser and colleagues did another study looking at 11 cases treated daily with infrared laser, LED, times 6 weeks. And again, saw improvement, but that persistence was not there. Again, as soon as they stopped treatment, they started losing ground. Casano and colleagues published a small case series of 4 patients treated with infrared LED, and they were not significantly improved. Arguably, depending on how you do the statistics. And more recently, Hipskin published 12 cases using infrared LEDs, and the results were reported as significant, but there was a problem. What they did is this is where multiple comparisons become important. If your only metric is a Hamilton depression scale, and you take a Hamilton at the beginning and a Hamilton at the end, you have one thing to compare, one statistic. But what if you do a Hamilton plus test X and test Y and test Z, and you take them all and you say at the end, look, it's all significantly better, but you have not corrected it for the fact that you have done 4 comparisons. So the idea of doing multiple comparisons, you have to correct your statistics. Otherwise, you will be you'll be reporting a potentially false positive because you give greater credit than is deserved if you take each study as a separate study. So 4 tests could really be 4 studies with 1 test. But if you combine them, you had to correct the statistics. Hipskin and colleagues failed to do that. So my read of the data was not significantly better. Our data, what we saw was a huge response, a huge change in how the patients were doing. In our Hamilton Depression Scale was very significant, but just in what I showed in that initial slide of how much their symptoms came down. In that real world, now again, a case series is not double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical data. That's what's missing. But we followed these patients up for years, just 7 years now, and they continue to do well. And this is one of those catch points. The idea of the persistent benefit. Mm-hmm. What did we do different, or did we just get really lucky in order to have that persistent difference? I don't know the answer. I'm asking. All right, so depression, same kind of thing. A depression study did using a 5-watt laser, so not these little half-watt LEDs, 5-watt laser, 16 treatments, significant improvement. The P was 0.031. We used our multi-watt laser, 13 watts, 20 treatments over the course of 9 weeks, 20 minutes each, and the patients have stayed better for 5 years. I mean, they continue to do well. I mean, I got an email the other day from this woman down in Florida who says, "Doc, you gave me my life back. I live every day with joy." And you don't hear that from patients with depression very often. So that, again, that idea of persistence. This is a device being used for PTSD. It's a helmet with LEDs and little fans to cool them. And then LEDs going up the nostrils because we want to try and get to the middle part of the brain is the hypothesis. Now, what they say they're treating is the default mode network. Now, I know a little bit about the default mode network because with Cyrus Raji and Andy Newberg and Rob Tarzrell and Daniel Lehman and Karen Willemeyer and others, we published 2 studies with over 24,000 subjects in them looking at the default mode network in traumatic brain injury versus PTSD. So I know where the components are. And there are 7 key components, only 2 of which you can reach with an LED. So the medial prefrontal cortex, which is tucked right in here, and let me give you this bracket here is 7 centimeters. Here's a SPECT scan showing the 7 centimeters, and here it is in an MRI. So the medial prefrontal cortex back in here, that's arguably 4 to 7 centimeters deep. Retrosphenial cortex, same thing. The hippocampus, tucked back in here, that's 7 centimeters. Parahippocampal gyrus, same thing. Precuneus, that's up here. You may be able to get the superficial part of the precuneus if you put it right there and they don't have hair, but most of the precuneus is down here. But the posterior parietal cortex, they certainly can reach. That's right here at the surface. And the angular gyrus, they certainly can reach. But that's only 2 components of the default mode network. The rest of it is out of reach.
Wait one second. Yeah. Because maybe you misspoke or maybe I misheard, but you're describing areas of the default mode network that can be reached with which technology? Laser?
Well, let me be clear. Yeah. Okay. So I'm showing a SPECT. Yeah. So I'm showing a SPECT scan so that you can see, and an MRI so you can see the anatomy.
Correct.
And I'm giving you, here is 7 centimeters.
Correct.
LEDs arguably cannot go 7 centimeters.
That's what you said.
I'm showing that they can't even go more than 2 millimeters.
Correct.
So for us to be using an LED to try to treat the default mode network when it's 7 centimeters in many places, again, there's that logic problem that I'm having with it. Okay, just to make the point.
Thank you.
All right, so let me give you just a couple of case examples of what we've done with the multi-watt laser. This is a patient with severe traumatic brain injury. This is an MRI, and in this particular settings for the MRI, scar tissue shows up as white, so does cerebral spinal fluid. So this is all scar tissue. This is basically dead brain. This patient was a veteran. He was injured at the time of his treatment, 32 years before. He had speech problems, he had gait problems, he had hand control problems. He fancied himself a poet, but his poetry is mostly word salad with a lot of clanging in it, words that sounded similar but didn't really go together. Here's a SPECT scan and crash course on SPECT scans. Yellow is normal, green is not so good, blue is bad, red is more active. So looking here's the dead area, but just focusing on these areas on the opposite side of the brain, the uninjured side. They were fairly low active and they became more active. A better way to see this that's more user-friendly, I mean, I look at these things all day, but this is a little more user-friendly. So color scale, again, yellow is normal, green is a little bit down. Whoops, hold on, I lost my cursor. There we go. Green is a little bit down, blue is bad, dark blue is more bad, and black is dead. So here's the area of dead tissue, the scarring. But look at all the areas around it that were not functioning well. And look at the opposite side of his brain that was not functioning well before treatment. 20 infrared laser treatments using multi-watt laser, and here's that same area. You can see all the increase in green. And look at the other side. You know, it looked like this before, and now it's functioning much better. His gait improved, his speech improved, his poetry improved. Second case, slightly different way of looking at a SPECT scan. So here we're comparing the SPECT scan data of the patient to a normal database.
Right.
So the normal database are people who don't have brain injuries, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol, counts me up, don't have a psychiatric disorder, and don't have a family history of a psychiatric disorder. And so everything that shows up as gray is in the normal range, plus or minus 2 standard deviations. Green is 2 to 3 standard deviations below, light blue 3 to 4, dark blue 4 to 5, black greater than 5. So you can see here, pretty significant lesion here in the right temporal lobe, much more significant in the left temporal lobe. She fell out of a pickup truck at freeway speeds. And here she is after treatment. So here's before treatment, here's after treatment, and it's 6 months later. And you can see how remarkably her temporal lobes had improved. Speech improved, memory improved, mood improved. Again, this is an anecdote. And I'm the first person who will say the plural of anecdote is not data. We need the double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. We did the study of depression and published that in Frontiers in Psychiatry in 2017. And the quick and dirty data here, and you can see here we're applying the laser, and you can see how we're right up against the skin. Right here, and you can see here's depression scales before treatment and after treatment. And what's interesting is the yellow bar is 8 weeks. So people who got just like 10 treatments in 8 weeks had the same benefit, and not too many antidepressants work in 8 weeks. Usually you're 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks.
So go back, go back 1 second if you put.
Please.
So these are depression severity scores. What does that mean? What scale did you use then?
Okay, this is the this is the quick inventory of depression symptomatology, or QIDS. It's 0 to 27. So this is moderate depression. If you're up in the 17 range, that's considered severe depression. And this is undepressed.
So what is the difference between all and less than 8 weeks? What is the difference? What is that?
Okay, so this was all patients. Some patients got 10 treatments, some patients got 20 treatments. Some patients were very lockstep and they came in every, twice a week, and other people were a little more lackadaisical about it, and it took them 6 months to get done with treatment.
Oh, so this is the depression scores for all the people and the people who had like twice a week type of care.
Correct.
And then that was your endpoint, was when they stopped the care.
Yes.
And this is an aside, did you get to follow these people up long term?
Yeah, I mean, many of them we're still in contact with. Some of them are my patients, and they're people that we sort of have a routine now of every 3 months we're calling people and checking in with them. Because this question of how long does this last is really important.
I agree.
So to give just a little aside, and I think others will comment on this, is the idea of neuroprotection. So one of my patients who was severely depressed went through this treatment. She has always been knocked down by relationship breakups, this, that, and the other bad thing. About 6 months ago, her mother dropped dead like that, just died within, a matter of hours, unexpectedly. And she calls me up and says, hey, I want to come in and talk. And, I'm thinking, okay, here we go. She's going to be back in treatment, time to break out the antidepressants. And she came in and she said, I'm kind of confused, doc. I'm really sad that my mom is dead. I'm grieving that my mom is dead, but I'm not going into that black hole. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
And for me, it means you and I get to celebrate because your brain is healthier and it stayed healthier. So the idea again of this persistent longevity of the effect. Okay, this one's totally just for fun, guys. We got 2 cases. I can't claim that I'm treating Parkinson's, but this is a Parkinson's patient with kind of the dropout that we can often see with Parkinson's before and after treatment. And here's her handwriting. Before treatment, after treatment.
I like
just
it.
For fun.
I like it.
All right, so what is going on? Why is there this difference between the LED effects, which have some benefit? I don't think anyone would argue that sometimes the ends are small and therefore our power is not enough, but the P's aren't all that great either. The statistical significance of these studies are small. And some of the studies where we have persistence data, they're not persistent. The benefits do not last. So it raises this question of what are we doing with LEDs? And this brings us to this really important idea of remote or indirect effects of infrared light. So just give you a couple of examples. Braverman, and this is well detailed in chapter 11 in the book that we just recently published, a whole bunch of us. So Braverman did a study where they wounded the forelimbs of rabbits. They treated one wound with laser. It got better faster. The other one also got better faster than you would expect it to. And that, how'd they know that? They had a bunch of rabbits they wounded and didn't treat with laser. So the contralateral wound benefited from the treatment to the first wound.
Gotcha.
A similar thing with the sciatic nerve. Rockkind did a sciatic nerve crush. And on both sides, treated one side, had a bunch of animals that had sciatic nerve crush that didn't get treated. And sure enough, the side that got treated got better faster, but so did the contralateral side. It got better faster than the untreated animals. And lastly, this idea that infrared light can have a neuroprotective effect. You treat the hind limb or the leg or the foot of a mouse with infrared light, and the next day you inject it with MPTP, which kills dopaminergic neurons. If you treat the animal, less dopaminergic neurons die following neurotoxin exposure. And the other thing is, look at Nasser's original study. She was putting near-infrared light on the foot, on an acupuncture point. on the foot, remote photobiomodulation. So the chapter that really talks about this is Dr. Johnstone's chapter in the book Photobiomodulation in the Brain. I don't want to take away any of what he might talk about or his thunder. I think it's a fantastic chapter. I ate it up. I've read it like 3 times. And so I'll let his team and his work from down under sort of talk more about that.
Well, I see you flip that over, though. If you put down under on the top, I like that.
It's how Australia sees the world.
Well, I mean, you have a different perspective too, right?
There you go. And that's all I got.
Okay, so let me bounce this back a little bit. Then go back a slide. Right there. So the question that comes the other side is, let's just say this. Let me flip it the other way.
Okay.
If laser and high powered, and they go a lot higher than 5 watts. They go a lot higher than 12 watts. They go a lot higher than 20 watts. So you can get a laser that's very high powered.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a direct effect with high powered laser, do you have more of a risk for having a negative effect?
Oh,
You
absolutely.
have a better chance of missing the target?
There's a better chance of cooking the target.
Well, they don't know. Not too many people can kind of comprehend it. I think I could pop off for a second here. I'll stop the share for a second and maybe we could come back. But I think we did a great job on that. I'm with you, Doc. I'm following you. But, you know, the same thing is if you take people don't realize that the laser keeps its energy at the end point. You know, if it does reach, you know, cortical neurons, there's not a whole lot of things that cool off a cortical neuron. So you know, when I used to do nerve regeneration in the legs and feet, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is very germane because people would say, oh, well, I use high-powered laser and I get more of effect. And I says, look, you only got to go like 7 millimeters and you're going to put a high-powered laser in there. It's heating up the tissue. It's coagulating nerves. Show me the data. Show me that you're getting these people better with high-powered lasers.
Right.
On skin. So I'm with you. So that's the thing is an in-office treatment with a high-powered laser is going to have more juice. It's going to get there. But then you also have the chance of like
more injury.
More chance of missing. So yeah. I mean, you know, we've got a lot of presentations. There's a lot of great information from the researchers and doctors and practitioners as far as theory, evidence, and practice. And we all have to put this stuff together and figure out what is it that we're doing and what is it that we're truly influencing. Because I agree with you. Direct effect is a highly studied objective because you're only going to look at, you know, that tissue there. And that's fine. And you got a lot of chance for error too, because same thing with laser, you may not reach the spot that you're shooting for and you may not have the oomph, but everything that went through is going to have been influenced also. And the things that people, you know, the people that are talking about transcranial photobiomodulation, there's a lot of tissue. There's the dura, right? There's the blood vessels. There's the CSF. So you got a lot of stuff that's missing. I mean, a lot of space before you get to the cortex.
Correct.
And think of it this way. If I have an Alzheimer's patient, I have atrophy, my brain and my cortex is that much further away, which would be included with what? More CSF. Of what viscosity? Of what level? So,
and it's moving.
And it's moving. So one of the things that I point out is when you're looking at anything becoming transcranial, so we have the direct effect, we have the indirect, but we also have static tissue and dynamic tissue. So static tissue, it can't run out of the way. It's like the tree. If you're burning down the forest, the tree can't get up and run. It's just going to get burned. But the river is not going to be affected because it's going to move. So the CSF, the blood, the venous pumping, all that stuff, that has a chance to take away, absorb the stuff, take away the heat, do everything like that. So when we're thinking about direct and indirect effects and how do we say, low power versus high power applications, the final formula is a lot of math. That's why I work with medical physicists, not me, because I'm not going to trust my math to do my checkbook, okay? But these are concepts that need to be put on, because if you are using laser light therapeutically, is it different than using light as a supplement? Is it different than using it as a vitamin? Because if you stop taking a vitamin, you really didn't rebuild anything, right? You just supplemented it. So, that's a concept that we have to kind of bounce around. What's your thought on that?
It's a great point. And whether it's direct or indirect, infrared light is doing something. And if that indirect effect is that it's supplementing and that leads to improvement, gosh, it'd be great to know what that supplement was, what it's actually turning on. But, from the standpoint of actually inducing neuroplasticity,
that's what you're saying.
I think that's where the direct effect comes in.
The long-term changes and the BDNF and the things that you talked about, probably, in some sense, more could be better. If you can get more of the output of the system that you're trying to influence, that's a good thing, right? We can agree on that, right?
Yeah.
So, the thing that kind of goes the other way, and this was found in Johnstone and the people from down on the Australia studies, they've got people, putting lampshades of LEDs that they make at home, and they're not touching the skin. They're just out here like this. Their writing's improving, and their speech is improving, and their gait is improving, and they got a big Parkinson's study and stuff going around. So, but again, if they stop doing it, they it goes away. So, you know what I mean? You got to.
Yeah. Is it a supplement effect?
Is it if you think of light energy as calories, you follow? Calories, food. If you give more, LEDs, if you will, and I feel like if you're drinking through a straw that's a laser and it's coming on real strong, well, you'll be full. But if I give you, a bushel of peas, you're going to be full too. So there may be something to the effect of how is it influencing the whole system, not just our direct thing. So I follow you, but I think that we have to look at it from a different. What are we trying to do? What can we do? What can we do?
Well, we number one, keep studying it and not present these as conclusions, not present these as facts, and therefore everybody go get an LED and stick it on their head.
Well, the thing when you transcribe, I find this is difficult. When you transcribe laser results to LED results, and you transcribe power to joules, and you go back and forth, it's a mishmash. And I can see that that's a real problem, even in the reporting of the data.
Yeah.
So I'm following you. I'm following the train of thought. But let me ask you this. So one of the guys who's been doing high-powered laser, like I say, like when we were still very, very, very young, we didn't have any gray hair at all. We've been doing this for a long time. High-powered lasers, 100-watt lasers, 200-watt lasers on paraplegics. And so it's Professor Lungo, Dr. Lungo. He's going to have his presentation. And the funny thing is that the things he was treating, the lesions he was treating, there was no tissue because the cord was severed. So if he can get a person to walk afterwards treating an area that didn't even exist, it sort of stretched his mind a little bit, I think. You follow me? So what was his direct response if the tissue wasn't there to even accept it, to get better? You follow the expansion I'm going?
Right.
So really early on, he kind of went with a, I think he called it coherent centers or dominant coherences. He looked at the aura or the energy systems of the body on the outside that were accepting light energy. And how that was what organized the flow and the function of these photons that we're throwing into them. So, you know, I think that we have to look at the human on maybe on the different levels that it exists. What do you say to that?
I'm open to it. You know, one of the things that Thomas Kuhn taught me, you know, is that you have to keep your mind open, because we don't know what we think we know.
Remember the guy who brings the paradigm shift is usually the one that they burn at the stake.
Oh yeah.
They don't burn everybody. They only burn the one that says, hey, I think, what about this? And then they go, you don't think like the rest of us. So I appreciate your work. I appreciate your time. I know that the people that you're influencing are having a great benefits and great positive outcomes. Thank you for sharing your work. Thank you for taking the time and participating in the outcome. What do you see the future, Ted? We're going to be sitting here doing the 2030 Brain and Transcranial Photobiomodulation Summit. What do you see happening? And I think, you know, your answer kind of pivots on what do we look at? What do we study? What do we understand?
Yeah.
You know, but how do you see it playing out 10 years from now?
Well, you know, one thing is I hope that that all of these techniques are being applied to a variety of modalities that we're not, you know, and then insurance is accepting it, that medicine recognizes the value of these modalities. I think if we keep pushing to understand the really interesting question of what is the indirect effect? Is it a chemical? Is it something about how the light energy gets transferred in the body? I think Dr. Longo is going to talk about this. You know, those types of things, if we dig at that and not fall into complacency, just saying, okay, slap an LED on the head and you'll get better, that's where I think things will really progress. I'm also really hopeful about the idea that we'll figure out how to synergize this. That is, take this modality and some other modality and put them together and create synergy and amplify the effect.
What you were saying, and the whole thing, you know, when you talk about pulsing and the frequency that you're putting in there, there's a lot of good information coming out in the summit on those topics, so that, you know, there's many different parameters that we can adjust, and it only makes it more complicated.
There you go.
You have to really think about these things and pay attention. And I think you gave us a lot of food for thought. And you didn't get too hot, right? We didn't burn you up too hot, did you?
No, I'm good.
That's good.
I'm used to it. I'm used to it. I'm used to being burned at the stake. That's what happens when you push on paradigms.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you for your time, Doc. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.